she meant was, now let's begin. I'm excited to see what will happen. So creation was created to be dynamic, then to change and evolve again and again. And that's what history is, the story of the evolution of things that makes them change all the time. So after many eons, there were glaciers, and when they melted, they left bits of Canada and the UP down here in Benzie County. They also left some beautiful lakes, and the most beautiful and precious of all was called Cap Lake by those who came here to lumber it and cut all the woods down. And then came along a man named Archibald Jones. Archibald was a thinker. He was a man who imagined great things, and he acted. So, looking things over with the lumber business, he thought that put the logs into the lake here, then they've got to put them on carts and haul them all the way down to the bay to the ships. If they could just float them down there, it would be so much easier. Now there's a little river south of here, and if I dug a canal from the river up to Cap Lake, they could float them down. So Archibald went to work. That was his way. He started down the Betsy River, and he started digging, and he had a canal almost up to Cap Lake. And then one day nature took over, and whoosh! Cap Lake started going down the Betsy River and out into the lake. Success, he thought. It roared for days and days and could be heard for miles. And when it stopped running, the top of Cap Lake was 17 feet closer to the bottom. It came to be called the tragedy of Cap Lake, but many people saw here a great opportunity. Instead of Cap Lake being surrounded by these high bluffs, there was a nice sandy beach. You could walk on the beach all the way around the lake. So they thought, you can sell lots for cottages up there. This is a business opportunity. And that's what they started to do. That had a lot to do with the success of the little town of Beulah over here, which was mostly underwater until then. Now the Ann Arbor Railroad had begun naming sections around the lake. They owned most of the woods on this south side of the lake. They decided a better name would be Crystal Lake. And in the middle of the south side, they designated an area as Crystal Beach. In 1915, a plat book over here was made for Benzie County. You can look at it there. And the part called Crystal Beach is right turned up there. Crystal Beach was all of our property here, as they saw it. And it is lined with roads that are named roads and lots for hundreds of cottages. The whole hillside up the hill. They had, in about 1900, given a section of land that ran from Crystal over to Lake Michigan to a bunch of Congregationalists. That was the birth of the Congregational Summer Assembly that's still very prominent around here. And in 1917, they offered a bunch of Disciples of Christ churches in Michigan a plat of land here on Crystal Beach. It was over a mile in length, and it had about 160 acres of woods with it. And all that was required, if the church would like to have it, was that they turned into a church campground. They happened to be looking for one around the state. If they turned into a church campground, and every year they would have summer events up there to draw the people up. Railroad tickets, of course. And the other thing they had to do was, within 10 years, show that they had made $250,000 in improvements. That's all they had to do. Well, the disciples were no fools. They took advantage of this. And by started having meetings here. They had people from all over the state come, but they also began to get people from farther away from the state. They leased lots to Michigan disciples, at first for about $100 for 25 years, and it finally got up to all of $500 for 25 years. That's about $40 a year. And a great churchman and planter from Grand Rapids, Albert Martin, really took charge and helped a lot of things happen around here. He helped them put up 2 buildings, Front Lodge and Eldred Lodge. You can see a sign out there where Eldred Lodge used to be right next to the shower house. And Front Lodge was right in here. Those 2 were going to be used for various purposes, but when the big tent they had for a dining hall proved to have too many leaks in it, they decided that one of the cottages would be a kitchen and a dining hall. And the other lodge that was up that way was named after Ray Eldred. Ray Eldred was a Michigan man who was one of the first disciples of Christ missionaries to go to Africa. That's how he got the name there. Well, people could come and stay in their own tents. We didn't worry, as you can see up the hill there. If you got a tent, you got a place to stay. And Mr. Martin then built his own home down here, and not only a lovely home, but he also built a big boathouse with a 2nd-story roof on it. And by 1927, there were 20-some cottages here, and they began to think, we only got a year and we've got to have more improvement. So they went to work like everything in 27 and early 28, and they accomplished the amount of building that they needed to. And then came a crisis, and with crises come changes, of course. The Ann Arbor had been sold to the Wabash Railroad, and the Wabash Railroad thought, what a foolish thing they did giving that land. And so the Wabash reneged on the deal. And the Cottagers put in some money, and the churches put in money, and they went to court. Took a couple of 3 years, and finally, local court here awarded the land to the disciples of Michigan. And then in time, Mr. Martin also built a large sawdust floored tabernacle right up on the hill here. How many of you remember the old, the smell it even catch you?
The furniture.
Then the furniture, yes. The furniture is interesting here. If you hear about life in the 1920s here at Crystal, it was romantic, but it was also sparkling. One of the best accounts is in your book. It's an account by Mrs. Ruiz. She wrote it in about 1970. And I want to share just a bit of it, but I want to encourage you to read that whole account because you get a feeling of the 20s from that. She wrote that far overriding the joys of the beach and the woods and the sounds of laughter and singing, there was a wonderful bond that we had between us. There were groups of young ones who mingled with ours at the conferences up on the center. The boys and guests from our house were expected to participate fully, and they did. The dads showed the way by building tables for the dining hall and a lectern for the chapel and almost anything else that needed to be built, the dads would put their time into. The mothers showed their belief in the bond by making curtains, organizing ice cream socials, auctions, writing and implementing a skit. And then there was a talent show. Each and every one took part, and who could forget Archie Hopkins and his wife and his violin, surely as memorable as Jack Benny's violin. One for all, halcyon days. They were also dynamic days. The lawsuit had been a great challenge, and no sooner had it descended on us than did the Great Depression. Some cottagers gave up their leases, and some sold cottages, and vacations became too costly for many people. Church budgets were stressed, and some of the congregations failed. Change was inevitable. Our United Christian Missionary Society had expanded ministries in Christian education and placed staff in various places. And in 1934, the UCMS signed Reverend H.L. Pickrell to 2 tasks in Michigan. He was sent here, one, to build a new model of campus ministry at the University of Michigan, built on the remains of the old Bible chair that our church had sponsored there for years. And the second, he was to be the state director of religious education for the Michigan churches. That put Pick, as he was known, in charge of Crystal. Now, Pick was a pastor and a teacher, and he was an old farm boy who had all kinds of skills. On a farm, you have to do most everything. So he made a lot of improvements to things up here. He brought university students up from Michigan. They would serve as camp counselors. They would help in maintaining the grounds, doing all kinds of things like that. And it was Pick who told me about the platform they had over at the drop-off. They would crawl up on the platform in 5 foot of water and dive into 75 feet. I don't think the state would let us have that. There are lots of things that the state would not let us do now. We had fewer congregations by then. Many of the small ones had closed, and some had started sending youth to other campgrounds around the state. And by the 1950s, we had maybe 45 to 50 congregations, about where we are now. In 1940, the clouds of war descended upon us. World War II demanded an awful lot of adjustments. Many women not only were working at home, but began taking paid jobs in offices and factories. Young men volunteered and were drafted, and many men went from 40 hours a week to 50 or 60 hours a week. Reverend Pickrell was reassigned to full-time work in the campus ministry at Ann Arbor, where hundreds of servicemen were in training. Isaiah Jacobs was assigned as our first state director of education. Who remembers Isaiah? She was with us in some of the first family camps. When the war ended, men were eager to finish their studies or begin life with the marriages that had been made during the war. Families had a lot of catching up to do, and a lot of women decided working wasn't so bad away from home. And staffing summer camps with volunteers, whether from churches or from our church families, was a much more difficult thing, and we had to start paying staff to do things. United Society's budgets got overstretched, and they could not offer quite as much help as they used to, and so we had to carry on much on our own in Michigan. The cinder block birches and pines were added to give better housing. Programs for children and youth continued. And a boost came in the 1950s when the college admissions was moved and put and used the space that Albert Martin had given to them in what's now Missions House. And at that time, still the old boathouse. You'll learn a little bit more about that after the break. In 1956, family camps were started and added to our camping list. Lloyd Channels of Flint and his wife Vera had spent most of the year, I think, talking with all kinds of authorities that they could find to see what schedules and what kind of programs would attract families to come here. And what they came up with was a wonderful success. Most of the people who were there in 1957 at the first, or 56, at the first family camp, left saying, we'll be back next year. And so there was a growth in our programs, and soon we had 2 and eventually 3 family camps. Now I think it's important for us to realize what the summer events at Crystal mean to the wider church. For decades, summer youth conferences had challenged and changed lives of young people. They were maybe the major place for years where young people happened to make their decision for a church vocation. It'd be interesting if we could find out how many Crystal Conferees went on to become pastors. We know one at least. Family friendships from family camps and women's friendships from the CWF conferences and retreats brought together people from our various congregations. And when you've got a friend in another congregation, there's talk back and forth, what's happening in your church. There's also an interchange of visits. And our churches began to know a little more of one another, and they began to realize what regional ministry does that's so important for every congregation's life. That became a very important thing in strengthening the bonds for regional work. We knew that when, in the early 60s, there was a major fund drive, and it was successful enough that we could build the new J. Frank Green dining hall up on the hill. We needed it from that over. For a number of years, associate regional ministers spent the summer with their families here, helping in the programs, managing the place. And then eventually Nancy Martin was named as the on-grounds Camp Martin manager. Do you remember Nancy? I remember Nancy well. These managers started to call our attention to the fact that the state was getting pretty smart with its ideas about camps, and they were making more and more requirements if you were going to run a camp. Counselors and staff had to be much more carefully vetted before you could name them to the staff. A nurse in decent nurses' quarters was always required. New rules were issued about the type and the size of things that you could use, like canoes or fire rings, and more adequate fire alarm systems and procedures for handling campers in case of emergency were prescribed. Food and housing inspections became the norm. It's a process that continues and continues, new regulations to protect the people that we're here to serve. Sometime in the 1960s, it became clear that servicing the central area and about 70 cottages by then meant that we were likely to be required to become a municipal water system. That was kind of a big threat. We already knew that the old above-ground pipes that stretched from Lob Road way up here to the west to serve the various cottages were a big trouble, not only to maintain, but also to keep going. And so other things were happening around. The cottagers were realizing that there were greater questions for them about legal matters, about development, how many boats can you have in front of your house. And in 1968, the Cottagers formed their own Crystal Beach Cottagers Association. Now, it was for these and for other reasons that in the early 1960s, the Crystal Commission began thinking maybe we ought to just sell the lots to the cottagers and get away with this lease business. It took a long and sometimes joint, very contentious process between the church negotiators and the Crystal Beach Cottager Association to work out all the kinks of that. Just think about what it meant. For 50 years you had little private lots, but all of the land outside those lots, all of the beaches were for everyone. Nobody had beach rights because everybody had beach rights. Now, if we were going to privatize the land holdings, should we increase the lots along the lakeshore to the water, the littoral rights to those cottages? But if we did that, what would you do with the cottages up on the hill on either end here? And the second tier of cottages or behind South Shore Road? And with the central area with its busy campground have to be closed off and become more safe for the kids that were running around there. And what about the fact that some of the cottagers had a fair bit of lease time left on their lots? And should the tennis court and the chapel still be available for all the cottagers if we did this? And let's be honest, most of us are likely to be Americans than better Christians where money is concerned. Most of us know that about ourselves when we think about it. Church leaders were eager to get as much help for church as they could from the sale. Cottagers were hoping to keep prices as modest as possible. Took a lot of negotiating. But the region and the Crystal Beach Cottagers Association finally together worked out a plan for this separation. It was a big, big change coming. And by the mid-1970s, almost all of the lots had been sold and new agreements had been put in use for the facilities and the roadways. Woods Road, the path that leads back up in that direction, that used to be a road from Lob Road down to the central area. We drove it in the 1950s. But it goes right in front of a couple of cottages up there. So it was closed off just to the west of all the cottages up there and became just a footpath. The Morrow Road that runs up behind the dining hall and services that became the access for the cottagers on the hill up here, so they wouldn't have to go through the camp. The Christian Commission had lots of volunteers, and we were able to build the oaks and the cedars, and the climbing tower was added. Now all of this meant that our facilities were growing to meet new needs, and the singing and the raucous noises on the beach and the great walks in the woods, the campouts in the piney woods or over on Lake Michigan at Point Betsy, all of those things were continuing. And the horror stories of Yellow Mike were told in every camp for years. And then, of course, there were the more gentle and kindly stories of Blue Sue that became taught for everyone. For many years, we had the benefit of a great amount of forest wisdom from George Buck. George helped us monitor the health of our woods. He helped us see to periodic harvesting. He told us we have a beech, birch, and maple climax forest, but it includes also ash, basswood, black cherry, near the shore some white birch. George kept us alive to the privilege and the responsibility of having a forest of our own. He taught us to love it, he taught us to use it, and he taught us to care for it. Today we don't have George anymore. I miss him. To take a walk through the woods with George was a delightful education. He knew all kinds of things about the woods. And as a result of not having somebody, we ran into the thing here a few years ago where we contracted for a modest harvest of wood up the hill, and we specified it was to be done without big machines and using horses. But the contractor fell ill and subcontracted the job and didn't specify all our requirements. And in winter, before somebody discovered it, a goodly portion of the hillside had been almost denuded and torn up by machines. That's going to take years, decades to recover. Recent campers have had less contact with the forest, I think, than used to be the case. But a faithful stewardship of that kind of an asset and its use for adventure and for educational purposes, that should be on our agenda every one of the next 100 years. Some of the programs that have served us so well for decades seem to be eliciting far less interest today than they once did. More and more local communities, as you know, are offering summer activities, sports camps, music and arts programs, various day camps, and middle and high school students who used to have the summer more free are drawn to those programs at home, which make it harder for them to then get to come for a whole weekend at a place like a church camp. Now, Brenda has been our camp manager for 28 years now. It's not an easy job. It's sometimes a very contentious job. For some years, Irv Berg was hired as our grounds manager. Now, for many years, Dick Murphy gave extensive help to Irv. And without Irv, you still see Dick running around here a great deal. You may not realize when you see him going from building to beach to woods to take care of things that have to be done now, you may not realize Dick has never been paid a cent for that. The point is, managing a place like this is an extensive responsibility. Brenda has managed the complex task of opening and closing all the buildings every year because she's had a lot of volunteer help. The Benzie boys have cared for our plumbing and making sure that the plumbing is properly prepared for winter and spring, all for nothing. Management tasks could be a huge expense for us if we had to pay for them all. And that may be where we're going to be. Can we continue to find enough volunteers of the right kind? Or are we going to have to face a significant cost hiring help for a lot of work to be done around here? You've likely heard now about the new arrangement that's going to be tried next year. United Camps, Conferences, and Retreats is going to take over the management work at Crystal. Now, just what all that means, I'm not sure. How much their services include, and the why of this new plan, those are going to be the subjects of a forum later here at 11. And if you're wondering about that, as a lot of us are, be here, and members of the Crystal Commission will be here to help you understand what's happening. My great concern, and I want to just share a few concerns here. My great concern is that we somehow reclaim Crystal for the churches of our disciple community in Michigan. That we work to rebuild in all of our congregations, and certainly among the pastors of our congregations, the great sense of pride and responsibility for this place that we used to have. There are such exciting new possibilities that need to be explored. going to take imagination, it's going to take time, it's going to take money. And you're here today for many reasons that this Crystal Beach Assembly has been inspiring and helpful to you. You need, and you know what this place is about. That's why you've come today. And we need to take the higher meaning of all of our experiences and translate them into new experiences and programs that will be as exciting in 2020 as what was happening here in 1920. Like all of God's creation, Crystal has been given to us to help it through change, to help it keep evolving. And as we begin a new century, Crystal needs all the friends it can get, not just on 100th anniversary days, but always. Crystal needs friends, and it's my guess that those who gather here today could be and are likely to be the core, if not the majority, of people who care enough to invest themselves in Crystal for the future. Now, my history here today has mainly involved the realities and forces that have shaped and reshaped what goes on here at the Crystal Beach Christian Assembly. I've not told you about the amazing personal experience that hundreds have had here. I've not named the number of youth who made decisions for Christ because they had come to CYF conferences here. But you here today know most of those stories. And what I want to urge you to do throughout today and tomorrow is to tell one another your stories of why this place is so beautiful and so important to you and so important to the life of Christ Church. I would hope that our enthusiasm here today can help us to redeem a sense of this place's value and the desire of the disciples in Michigan to make this place serve the Lord as it has and should always. Well, let me stop there and see if there happen to be any questions, any comments. What have you all got to add to this experience? Any question about it all? That means I've answered everything. How fortunate. Yeah, but I can't see your faces, so I may not recognize you.
It's Brenda.
Russ and Ricky tried, I was married for 9 years, 96. I just want to say another blessing.
Many of us here have recognized what a big job managing this place is. You have to deal with cottagers, and they can be as cranky as church people. You have to deal with all kinds of new regulations that you didn't know existed last year. You have to deal with campers who expect a good deal. Brenda knows full well that if we want to rent places out here for people to come and vacation, those cinder block cottages are not up to snuff for this century. Not many families would go on vacation to live in rooms like that. We've got so many needs to come, and the camp manager gets all of those poured down him or her. And you can about drown that way, and I've seen Brenda when she was near drowned. So I want to just say I can't imagine carrying the responsibility. Have you ever tried to live in Lake Shore? That's where Brenda lives, as she manages the camp. Have you ever tried to live in that old building in October when you're trying to get things cold, and it's cold as can be? And Brenda's there. Brenda and Dick are scurrying around the camp. I am so grateful every time I come that someone is willing to tackle all of that mess. I don't know how that's going to work out with the new arrangement next year. But whatever works out, know that whoever is managing this place has got a huge, and sometimes it seems an impossible job. Support them. Give them your love and your caring and your help. Anyone else? Yes?
2 years ago, I got baptized in Crystal Lake.
I'm sorry.
2 years ago, I got baptized in Crystal Lake.
You were baptized here. And there are so many people who will say it was up at the conference in Crystal that something radically changed in my life. And commitments were made. And the church was the richer for it. This place is so important to the work of the church here as always. One thing you'll hear about in a few minutes is about the College of Missions. When the College of Missions people were here, the missionaries were so generous with your time. And there was a new interest that they were able to stir in the world mission of the church by spending an evening with family campers or some of the cottagers. Those are the kind of things that make such a difference. And this is a place that serves the needs of God's church. That's why we need it so badly. Anyone else? Yes. Who? Oh, yes.
Could you confirm what year Pioneer was built? I was told it was 1917.
I do not know that. It was the first building, but I know that the two lodges were built very quickly too, and I do not know. You probably helped a lot in getting that thing reconditioned and made a little more modern, didn't you? Yeah. If you haven't been inside Pioneer, it's a lovely place. Now I remember when we were having family camps, and Paul Johnson and his many-person family lived in Pioneer. I don't know how they all found beds. But while they were doing that, we also used the porch of that every day for the toddlers and the small kids. So it had to, I mean, they had to share it with everybody. Good Lord.
Russ, when I lived in Pioneer as a lifeguard here, before I was the manager, I actually fell through the floor in the bathroom when I was brushing my teeth. So and then Sandy's daughter was a lifeguard here, and he's very good at carpentry and everything, so he took it off of Helen and volunteers, and they remodeled it. It is new.
I got one. When you were talking about the handprints of Mike, I was here for that. It was kind of cool because a lot of the campers didn't know what that meant of the Mike's handprints, and they kept on asking what the handprints were. I said that was about a movie because of Crystal Lake.
Let's give a good thanks for